Thank you, everybody. It's so nice to be back. I think I've been here a couple of times, and I certainly know a lot of the familiar faces that I see out here. And previous times I've come and talked to you about stress. Stress, of course, is a really heavy issue and important issue, and we all experience stress to some degree. And I've come also to talk about sleep. And sleep also is a very self-evident, important aspect of health. Today I come to talk about breathing. And just out of curiosity, how many of you here told a friend or a family member that you were coming out to this talk tonight? Just a show of hands. Okay. And how many of you said, I'm going to the Toronto Rehab Alumni talk? Something of that nature. How many of you said, I'm going to a talk on breathing? Okay, a few of you brave souls. You know, breathing, I think, gets no respect. And I'll tell you why I think that. I told my wife I'm going to give a talk on breathing. And in fact, I said it's going to be on the mechanics of proper breathing. And she said, where are you giving it? In the morgue? Like, everybody breathes. What's the story here? Well, breathing, I think, is a very interesting topic because it sort of goes under the radar. We're all breathing all the time, and so we don't usually pay a lot of attention to it. And I think one of the things that I want to open our eyes to is the ways in which it might be very, very important for cardiac rehab. So that's what I hope to do. Now, because breathing gets no respect, I had to start with Rodney Dangerfield, who is the guy who said, I get no respect, right? And he, I think, and this is one of my favorite jokes, he says, I told my psychiatrist that everyone hates me. He said, you're being ridiculous. Everyone hasn't even met you yet. How could that be, right? Okay. So let's get to what we're going to cover. So we're going to do two halves or two parts to this presentation. In the first part, I'm going to give you some information. I'm going to talk about the science behind breathing and how breathing works in the body. So that's to give you a background and an understanding. And then from that, we're going to go and look at how are we breathing. So we're going to do an assessment, a behavioral assessment of how we breathe. Hopefully, as you came in, you got a sheet that is a form that we're going to use later on. If you didn't get one, you'll have to have one later. And, and then we're going to go through some demonstrations of breathing exercises that can be helpful. Now, for me to know who I'm speaking to, how many of you sitting here have actually done the cardiac rehab program, maybe our program or another one? Okay, so a vast majority of you. How many of you, when you did your cardiac rehab program, did some aerobic, that is walking exercise or biking? Looks like it's pretty much everybody, right? How many of you did resistance training during your cardiac rehab? Okay, looks like quite a majority, probably 3/4 or more. How many of you did any breathing exercises or were taught breathing exercises during your cardiac rehab? Okay, so it's maybe 10% of the total. So if I asked you right now, knowing what you know coming into this talk, should breathing exercises be included in cardiac rehab? Would you say yes or no? So if you think yes, raise your hand. Okay, so quite a few. It looks like just under half. So we'll come back to this question after I've explained what we now understand about breathing and how it works in the body. I've always been interested in breathing. My practice is mainly in health psychology. So I'm seeing patients who are struggling with some or a number of health issues. Cardiac is obviously one of the important ones, but there's many, many health issues that people struggle with. In the last 8 years or so, I've been fortunate enough to work at Toronto Rehab, which I love, and I've run a group for stress management. And from the very beginning, one of the things that I incorporated into the program was breathing exercises. And that was because, having used them in my practice for years before that, I understood that patients need tools that they can use easily, don't require a lot of equipment, and that work pretty well. And I think most of the feedback that I get from patients taking my program is that the breathing is helpful. It works. And of course, in the program that I run, we go on from breathing to talk about many other body and mind techniques. But breathing remains a foundation, even for things like meditation. In addition, more recently, I've added sleep management or improving sleep patterns into the program that I run. And we've used breathing techniques as one of the ways that people in particular are able to either get to sleep, or more importantly, if they wake up in the middle of the night, able to get themselves back to sleep in a better or quicker way. So there are many ways in which breathing just makes a lot of sense to me clinically. And I started looking at, well, what do we know and understand about how breathing works? And which programs, which cardiac rehab programs are using breathing in any way? I wasn't able to find any programs in Canada or North America that employ or use breathing exercises in any regular or systematic way. But there are some positive signs on the horizon, and I'll talk about those in a minute. One of the things I'm going to highlight, though, in the next 20 minutes or so is work done by Stephen Elliott. And he is a very interesting guy. He talks about breathing as the thoracic pump. And he's done a lot of work on looking at the science of what happens when we're breathing and how is it that it affects our autonomic nervous system and our sense of well-being. And he's coined a phrase, the Valsalva wave, which is referring to the effect that breathing has on blood circulation. So I'll explain that. Hopefully I'll explain it well enough that it'll make total sense to you. So let's begin with what happens with your heart rate. So all of you are cardiac patients, or many of you were when you were through our program. So what happens when you breathe in and out? Well, we know that your breath rate, or sorry, your heart rate is not fixed. So if you measure the interval from one beat to the next beat, it's going to vary. Some of them are a little shorter, some of them are a little longer. And if you were kind of to arrange them in a sequence, you'd see a lot of variability. And in fact, what happens to be true is that the more variable your heart rate is, the healthier you are. It's a good thing. And, or to put it in the reverse order, that we know that for those patients whose heart rates are very, very predictable and occur with very low level of variability, tend to be sicker and closer to death. Okay? So, variability is a good thing. So I want you to remember that thought. And on this slide, what you see is that as you breathe in on inhalation, and as you exhale, exhalation, your heart rate is going to either speed up or slow down. Speed up or slow down. And it occurs in a very predictable kind of sinusoidal wave, and so that's called a sinus wave. And this phenomenon is called respiratory, because it's because of breathing. Respiratory, sinus, because of this sinus wave. Arrhythmia, arrhythmia meaning not constant rhythm. But this is a kind of arrhythmia you want. It's not one that you don't want. Okay. Now why? Why does your heart speed up and slow down and speed up and slow down? Why does it do that, and how does it do it? Well, the answer is your autonomic nervous system. And your autonomic nervous system, which is pictured in this slide, has two branches. One is called the sympathetic branch. It's the gas pedal of the stress system. It accelerates heart rate and it accelerates activity so that you can deal with dangers and such. That's why I'm interested in it. I deal with stress management. There is another side of the coin, and that is the parasympathetic nervous system. That's indicated on the right side of the diagram with the bluish violet kind of color. And what it does, it's the brake in the system. So it says, whoa, slow down, you're going too fast. And the body, at any one point in time, is collecting information. And we'll see where it's collecting information from. And then there's a little monkey in the brain that's sort of tapping the gas pedal or tapping the brake, speeding it up or slowing it down. And it's the interplay between the gas pedal and the brake, the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system, that results in this breathing-induced heart rate variability. That's the good variability, or also called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. Now, here's another interesting finding. If it happened that you cut the nerve, the vagus nerve, which is the one that delivers the parasympathetic response, the brake in the system, then what happens is that this heart rate variability disappears. It stops completely, and you have a very constant beat in the heart.
Your lungs expand to bring in life's essential gas, oxygen, from the air. Expanded lungs naturally contract to expel the body's waste gas, carbon dioxide. Your lungs usually expand and contract in two main ways. One is an unconscious downward and upward movement of a thin muscle called the diaphragm, which separates the chest from the belly. The other way is by raising or lowering the ribs to increase or decrease the volume of the chest cavity. We breathe in or inhale when the diaphragm contracts. This pulls the lower part of the lungs downward. When we breathe out or exhale, the diaphragm and lungs relax and return to their resting positions. Quiet, deep belly breathing is a more consciously controlled breathing that, with practice, can become the standard way you breathe. Deep belly breathing aids the diaphragm muscle movement by expanding and contracting the abdomen, the area below the diaphragm. This allows the belly muscles to push stomach and diaphragm up, which forces out more carbon dioxide waste.
So the diaphragm is a muscle you cannot see, okay? It's tucked in behind the ribs, and the only way you know it's working is what happens with your belly. So as you saw from the video, as the person breathed in, that belly moved outward because it's moving everything in the stomach cavity down and out. The amount of movement that the diaphragm can generate from its kind of resting central point is about 5 centimeters upward and about 5 centimeters downward, for a total traveling distance, if you will, of about 10 centimeters. Now this is important because not all of us are using that diaphragmatic muscle well, and I'll explain. So what does this muscle, the diaphragmatic muscle, when it's moving up and down, do? Well, let's remember what's directly above that muscle. So this diagram illustrates that blood is coming from the heart, which is that sort of darker red organ in the background in the middle, and the red blood fills the lungs. Okay, that makes sense. That's where it gets its oxygen. And then once it's got its oxygen, then it goes back into the heart and it gets pumped into the aorta and out to the body. Okay? So that's the sequence, and that's where it flows. So let's think about what happens when you breathe in and out. So when your diaphragm is moving up, so when you complete your exhale, so when you exhale, you're going to squeeze all the air out by tightening up your abdominal muscles. You squeeze those. That pushes that diaphragm we saw in the picture up high. And of course, that's going to push all the blood that's sitting in those lungs. It's going to squeeze it out, like squeezing I guess, what do you have, a sponge or something, right? And what's left in the heart or in the lungs is about 200 milliliters of blood. Now, the opposite happens when you breathe in deeply. When you fill your lungs with air, okay, and you move your tummy out, okay, you create a vacuum which brings lots of air into the lungs, but it also brings lots of blood into the lungs, okay? So air comes in and blood also comes in. Very important. So how does that affect your heart? Well, your heart rate has to change, okay? When this much blood, you see the little container over there? That much blood that's in the lungs, when you exhale it quickly, that gets pushed out into the heart and then gets pushed from the heart into the body. When it flows out to the aorta, it's going to increase your blood pressure. So as a result, your nervous system has to intervene. It has to say, wait a minute, we better hit the brakes here. Tap the brakes, because there's going to be a lot more pressure in the system than we need. On the other hand, when you breathe in and this amount of blood disappears into that hole, that black hole of the lungs, and it's not available in the rest of the body, your autonomic nervous system has to speed up your heart, has to increase it, because it's got to keep a pressure going so that you don't faint and collapse, right? Very important. Does that make sense to everybody? That your breathing air in also changes dynamically the blood volume that's in your body, upward and downward, upward and downward, okay? So why does the heart rate change? Well, to balance out effectively the blood pressure and the blood volume throughout the body. It's kind of always adjusting to balance out whatever the lungs have been doing. And if you examine what we're talking about here, you'll see that breathing can directly impact what happens with your heart, your body, and very importantly, your nervous system. So you can actually moderate what parts of your nervous system are going to be more active when you do a deep breathing exercise, breathing in and breathing out. So changes in blood flow and pressure should happen before you see a change in the heart rate. So let's see if that's the case. So in this diagram, if you look at the blue line is the blood wave, or the volume of blood that's measured. In this case, it's measured in the finger. And you'll see it will go down, and then it will go up, and it will go down, and it will go up. Also measured simultaneously in this is your heart rate. And you'll see that it does its best to balance out the blood flow. So as the blood flow comes down, the heart rate goes up, has to compensate, keep the balance. But you'll notice the question is, which is leading and which is following? And it's the blood volume that occurs, the change in blood volume, the absolute lowest point of that is at 5.5 seconds on this graph here. And you'll see that the heart rate takes about 2 seconds to kind of catch up with it, right? You see that? So you've got a system where when you breathe intentionally, you fill your lungs with air, you squeeze that blood out, that peaks the amount of blood in the body in various places, and your heart rate has to compensate and come down for that, okay? And that is what leads to heart rate variability. How does this fit with what we know about heart disease? So if we look at congestive heart failure, what do we notice there? Well, the patient who has congestive heart failure has a heart that's very, very thick and it's not very efficient. So it manages to pump blood out, but not so much, right? Its efficiency is very limited compared to a normal heart. So as a result, this is almost like not breathing very deeply at all, right? So there's not a lot of blood going out there. So as a result, the sympathetic nervous system has to compensate for the lack of blood to keep the blood pressure and blood volume at good levels. So the autonomic nervous system is upregulated in congestive heart failure patients so that the nervous system, so that the patient can function normally. So how are breathing and the autonomic nervous system related? Well, hopefully it's kind of becoming clear that when you breathe deeply, that increases the volume of blood that you displace into and out of the body, because you're absorbing more of it into the lungs, into the sponge, and then when you exhale, you're going to displace it into the body, and you're giving your nervous system, in a way, a workout, so that the parasympathetic nervous system has to slow down and hit the brakes when you're getting a lot of blood showing up from your deep breathing, and your sympathetic has to increase it when you're breathing into your lungs and getting a lot of blood also in your lungs. So these deeper breaths will increase arterial wall pressure in the aorta, and therefore the autonomic nervous system compensates for it by lowering blood pressure as needed. Now, we're going to talk about proper breathing. And what do we mean by proper breathing? Well, is there a right way to breathe? I don't know. But here is what happens when you breathe deeply versus breathing in a shallow way. So the two columns, the left column or the middle column in this diagram is what happens if you're breathing in a shallow way at about 10% of your lungs' vital capacity. So VC is vital capacity. And on the right column, it's when you're breathing deeply in and out using about 75% of your lungs' capacity. So what happens? Remember we showed you that diaphragm moving beautifully up and down? When you're breathing shallowly, it's barely moving, okay? It might go 1 centimeter up, down, okay? Not a lot of movement. If it's not moving up or down very much, it's not causing a lot of blood to come into the lungs and to go out of the lungs. So you have a 10% movement. In contrast, if you're breathing deeper, you've practiced doing some deep breathing exercises, you might get 7.5 centimeters of movement. Now, remember I said you might get 5 centimeters down from normal and 5 up. So the maximum you could get probably is about 10. And this will probably depend on our bodies and aging and the conditioning of muscles and so forth. So it's not a guaranteed 7.5 centimeters, but it would be potentially much, much higher than if you're breathing in a shallow way. And of course, that additional movement, every additional bit of movement that you can create in that diaphragm is going to impact the intrapleural pressure, that is the pressure inside the lungs. And if you're shallow breathing, you might get 2.5 centimeters of pressure. And when you're breathing deeply, you might get up to 25 centimeters or 10 times the pressure on the blood or the vascular system. Okay? So you get a huge leverage, but only if you're breathing deeply. Okay? It also can be seen in terms of the air exchange. So if you're breathing in a shallow way, the air that comes in and goes out is maybe 1/2 liter. Okay? And in contrast, if you're breathing deeply and you measure how much you're breathing each breath, it can be up to 3.5 liters of air. And similarly, the respiratory arterial pressure is 2 millimeters of mercury if you're shallow breathing, and it can be up to 20. So you see there's almost a 10-time impact on the pressures that you can generate. And that, of course, translates into working out your nervous system, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, 10 times more vigorously. So it ends up being quite a benefit. And of course, the big payoff is what is happening to heart rate variability. Remember, we said that this kind of heart rate variability or arrhythmia was a good thing. And in a shallow breather, you might get 5.3 beats. And in a good deep breather, abdominal breather, you might get up to 40 beats, or almost not quite a 10 times improvement. So let's look at what this means for your breathing. So this is a little bit of a busy slide, but I'll walk you through it. Let's first of all look at the red lines. And what this represents, you'll see on the far right side of the diagram, you'll see the number 30 beside the reds. And this is somebody who is a shallow breather who is breathing at 30 breaths per minute. Okay? So this is really, really fast. And what you see is if you're breathing that fast, that your beats per minute, the heart rate, is going to vary between 93.5 and 90.5 in this example. Or between top and bottom, you'll see on the far right side, there's a little sign that says 3 beats of variability. So if you're breathing very quickly, you have very little heart rate variability, 3 beats. If you slow down your breathing in half from 30 to 15, now your heart rate variability has improved because you're going to about 4 beats of heart rate variability. If you bring it to half of that again, to about 7.5 breaths per minute, then you have up to 11 beats of heart rate variability. So you see how it's really beginning to go up, and going from 7.5 breaths in a minute to 5 breaths in a minute, that heart rate variability triples, goes to 34. Okay? So if you understand that it's a good thing to have more heart rate variability, what rate of breathing do you want to aim to do? 7.5? 7.5, 5 would be better. So, but we'll come back to that, and we're going to do some practice and see how that works out for us. So if I kind of pull together what are the main drivers for your circulation, for how your blood circulates through the body, of course, at the top of the heap we have the heart. Everybody knows that's the heart's job. But it's only one of 4 main drivers. The other 3 are respiration. So what I've described for you is what Stephen Elliott calls the thoracic pump, using your diaphragmatic muscle to pull air into the lungs, and then using your abdominal muscle to get the diaphragm to move up as high as it can in order to squeeze the air and the blood out. So it participates in circulation, and we'll see how much the heart contributes to blood volumes and how much respiration contributes. There's 2 other factors. One is vascular relaxation and constriction. So if your body muscles are really tense and tight because you've been stressed, okay, then that's going to increase the blood pressure in those vessels. And finally, gravity. When you're lying flat on your back, okay, it's easier for blood to circulate around. When you're standing up, it's much harder. So all those 4 factors are constantly being monitored by your autonomic nervous system, and it's applying the brakes and the gas pedals for you. Okay, so this is an interesting diagram. So this is showing you what Stephen Elliott calls the Valsalva wave. And you'll notice that it's kind of like a range of mountains where there's peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys. And the little jagged ones that you see are what the heart does. Okay? So the heart rate pushes the heart rate up, that's called systole, and then when it relaxes, it comes down, that's called the diastolic phase, and it goes back and forth, up and down. But you'll notice that those are little waves on the ocean, and there's underlying it some big waves. And those big waves are what your breathing can create. And I say can because if you're breathing in a shallow way, that background waves are completely flat. And you're just getting the ups and downs from the heart pumping. And this is why, this shows you the potential of deep breathing to increase our heart rate variability, to actually limber up our nervous and vascular systems by doing some gentle exercises in order to activate this Valsalva wave. So Elliot calls the Valsalva wave the breathing-induced component of circulation, but very importantly, it has the power of doubling or tripling your heart rate variability. And as heart patients, we're all very interested in that. Now, I mentioned that there hasn't been a lot of research on what breathing does in terms of helping heart patients recover from heart events. And I'm going to cite two examples of some recent encouraging results. The first is work by Jan van Dixhoorn and Adrian White. Now, this is a summary paper, but Jan van Dixhoorn did a study of heart patients doing cardiac rehab in the 90s, and he found very good and positive results from teaching them how to do breathing as part of their cardiac rehab. More recently, they've used what's called inspiratory muscle training, which is a fancy way of saying teaching someone how to breathe in a more active, aggressive way. And they've used a lot of those techniques with heart failure patients because they struggle the most. And the idea is, let's give them every tool we can think of. And you know what? It works. It helps. So if it helps those who are most in need, it probably will help you too. But we don't know that for sure because we haven't done all the studies about that. So let's leave the heart for just a while because there are other important features to this story. And here in this slide it's called the bigger picture. So don't forget that the diaphragm not only affects the heart and lungs, which we've been focusing on, which is above the diaphragm, but it also very beautifully is designed to affect what's below it, meaning the gut. So that includes where your liver, your stomach, your spleen, your intestines. So here's the interesting thing. Let's look at the left side of the diagram. You have the sympathetic branch. Now, we said that was the gas pedal for your heart, and it is. But if you look further down for your gut, it's the brake. So the same activity that is helping your heart go faster is actually slowing your gut. And on the right side with the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nerve, so when you're activating that, you're actually slowing down your heart rate, but down below in the gut, you're mobilizing activity, okay? So your body has been set up, designed with the diaphragm and the diaphragm muscle playing a key role in not only your heart health, in better heart rate variability, but as well in your respiratory ability to take in deep breaths of air, and in your GI tract to get your food and so forth to move through the system. So, quick summary. What does breathing and abdominal breathing do? Number one, you're training your autonomic nervous system to have better vagal tone. That's what happens when you're kind of breathing deeply, you're kind of exercising the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system and getting them to kind of work together. In addition, and that's good for the heart, it's good for respiration. In addition, it's also very good for your digestive system. So moving food through the gut with these muscles kind of working from the outside That creates what's called peristalsis, and that moves food through so you can keep regular and you get all the nutrients from the food you're eating and so forth. So that's a good thing. But finally, so this is where I sound like, you know, those late night guys. There's more. There's more. The thoracic pump, your diaphragm and your abdominal muscles also are the motor for the lymph system. So the body has a lymph system which is where a lot of your immune functions sort of operate out of and travel around through the lymph system. And it doesn't have a heart. It's a kind of a circulatory system in the body, but they forgot to put a pump in for it, okay? Or it looks like they forgot to put a pump. But the pump is your diaphragm and your abdomen working at breathing. When you're doing that well and effectively, you're also running your immune system well by keeping the lymph moving in the body. And finally, there's other advantages. Breathing well helps you sing. Okay, if any of you are singers or want to become singers, okay, or at least singing in the shower, it's a benefit for that. So those are, I think, what I would think of as all valuable reasons, well, important reasons for us to pay attention to breathing and to give a little bit of time to it in our cardiac rehab programs, but generally in being healthy and well. So, let me get to the question. What do you think now? How many of you here would say that breathing exercises should definitely be included in cardiac rehab? Show of hands. Okay, so it looks like most of you, but there's some that are not sure, or you may need some more evidence, right? So I'm going to pause here and entertain some questions. So if you have something that you want to ask about or something you're not clear on, I'm happy to clarify it. Yes, sir.
My question deals specifically with blood pressure. When I monitor my pressure at home, my readings are at about the 115 over 70, 65 range.
Yeah.
As soon as I go to the doctor, they go through the roof. So it's that white coat fever.
Yes.
Would this deep breathing in his office bring me back down to get the kind of measurement that would cause him to pat me on the back?
I can't guarantee it, but here's what I would say. You would probably have to practice the breathing exercises for at least 3 or 4 weeks because these are physiological processes. So what I don't want you to do is run out to your doctor tomorrow, do some breathing, and then have him measure you because it's going to be disappointing. Okay? It will be. Much the same as if you asked me, Doc, would it help me to exercise in order to do a 5K run? And I'd say, sure. And you say, great, I'm signing up, there's one tomorrow, right? You'd say, wait a minute, this isn't going to work. So give yourself time to train those muscles. You have to train them like every other muscle. You may have to start slow and kind of build up. And it's the repetition that builds the strength. So doing it every day for short 5-minute periods, 2 times a day, 3 times a day, that's what we urge our patients to do. And it works pretty well. But I'd say don't try it in the doctor's office at least for a month. And then what you should do is go in there and give yourself maybe a couple minutes to do some breathing as you're waiting on the table. And then see what happens. It's an experiment. You can tell us next time we get together. So the first thing we're going to do is I want you to put one hand on your upper chest, up here on the bony part of your chest. The other hand is on your belly, just above your belly button. And I want you to breathe in. Okay? And breathe out. And just notice the movement of your hands. As you're breathing in and out, do you notice whether one hand is moving or both hands are moving? Both? Okay. Could be just one. So I'm going to guide you through some questions. So the first question is, as you take a deep inhale, I want you to pay attention to which hand is moving first. If it's only If both are moving, does one move before the other, or do they move at the same time? Okay? So as you take a deep breath in, notice the upper and the lower hand, the chest hand and the belly hand, and which one starts moving first. Okay? So what you can do is you don't have to shout out your answer, but you can just check off your answer. This is question number 2 as you go across. Which hand moves first? The chest is the upper hand, the left hand, and the belly is the one on your abdomen, lower hand. Or if it's both hands are moving first, then you can check off in between, in the middle. All right, so that's question number 2. Question number 3, when you were doing that, which of the 2 hands moved the most? Now, it could be the same one, or it could be another one. Or it could be they were both the same. There was no difference. And again, put your check mark in one of those 3 columns. Okay, now we're going to go to another observation. This time you only need to put your hand on your abdomen, your belly. And I want you to notice as you take an inhale, breathing air in, your hand could do one of 2 things. It could start to move inward, or it could start to move outward. So as you start the inhale, does it seem to want to come inward, or does it want to go outward? Okay, so whichever way it is, again, check off. There's in or out, or in between is neither, where you're not sure, it doesn't seem to move at all. And that's quite possible too, right? That was question number 4. Is everybody with me? If there's any problems you're having, or I'm going way too fast, just hold up your hand. Okay, everybody's with me. Good. Now the next question is, if your hand moved out. So if your hand moved in on the previous one, then I want you to check off the first column, which says a little, okay? If it moved in. But if it moved out, I want you to look at how much does it seem to move out. Okay, because remember, this is a measure of how active your diaphragm is, because we can't see the diaphragm. But did it move just a little bit in between, or a lot? It is subjective, but just give it your best shot. That's for question number 5. Check off one of those 3 options. Okay, question number 6. So now, after we've completely filled our lungs with air, and we're starting the exhale, does it seem like your hand is moving inward, or does it seem to move outward from the body? So just pay attention to it as you're starting your exhale. You're blowing the air out. Which way does it move now? And you can check that off. That's for question number 6. Everybody with me here? Okay, next, we're going to count. We're going to count our breaths. So I will tell you when to start counting, and then you're just going to count how many times you breathe in and out. So a cycle of breath is both parts. You breathe the air in, and you exhale it, and that counts 1. Everybody with me on that? Okay, and when I say start counting, you're going to just count and just see how many. And as you're counting, you're not trying to speed up your breath or slow it down. Literally, you're just observing it, and the breath is just coming in and out, and you're just observing how many there are. You might want to hold your mouth open a little bit, just so the air can come in through your nose or mouth, whichever is most comfortable. You may want to have your feet flat on the floor so that there's no stress on your breathing. Okay, everybody know what you're doing? Okay, ready and start. And stop. Okay, so the number that you got is going to go in the first column. It says number of breaths taken in 1 minute, number, and then there's a space. So write the number down that you counted to. And then, yes? No, this is question number 1. And then if that number happens to be 15 or a bigger number than 15, put a check mark in the first column. If that number is 11 or 10 or 9 or smaller than 12, put a check mark in the right column. And if it's somewhere between 11 and 15, put a check mark in the middle. Everybody with me on that? Okay. Now we're going to do, the next question is, in the last month, have you noticed that you take a sighing breath? So that's where you kind of go, just kind of involuntarily, kind of take a deeper breath. Just comes from nowhere. Or you may yawn. You just kind of spontaneously go, oh, right? Or you may be short of breath on a regular basis. So it happens fairly consistently. And that's question number 8, and you can answer that yes or no, depending on if that happens to you with some regularity. Okay? So it's just a measure of, does your body seem to be short of breath from time to time? Okay. Now the last 3 are lots of fun. So I'm going to demonstrate what we're doing, and then you're going to do these with me. So in the first one, this is for number 7, what I'm going to do is, and you're going to join me in taking 5 breaths in and out. So I'll show you the rhythm of it, and then we'll start doing it together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a full breath in and a full breath out. Full breath in, full breath out. Full breath in, full breath out. Okay, you get what you're doing? So you're filling your lungs, and then you're emptying your lungs, and then you're filling. We're going to do that 5 times in a row. Everybody ready? Okay, let's get started. Deep breath in and out. And in and out. And in and out. And in and out. And in and out. Now the question is, do you feel dizzy? Okay, so if you do, this is question number 7. You can answer yes or no. Or if you think you're kind of somewhere in between, you can put it in between. Okay, anybody need more time? No? Good. Now we're going to do question 9. So here's what you're doing. You're all going to do this quietly where you're sitting, but you're going to be speaking out. You're going to be saying numbers in a whisper. So here's the exercise. I'm going to take a deep breath in, fill my lungs completely, and I'm going to start counting from the number 1. I'm not going to miss any numbers, and I'm going to talk very quietly but distinctively, and just see how far I can count up to. Okay, so it goes like this. and so on, until you have to breathe in. And then what was the last number that you got to before you had to take a breath in? Okay? Sorry? What was mine? I think I counted to 60, but I can usually do up to 74. But I'm kind of bashful up here in front of everyone, so. If you do get to 100, you can start at 1 again, so just in case anybody gets there. Okay? So take a deep breath in when you're ready, and just start counting quietly in a whisper, and go. Breathe in either way. Through the mouth is fine, but you have to speak it out, like whisper the numbers, and see how far you can get. Now what we're going to do is a little test to see how long you can tolerate your body building up carbon dioxide before you have to breathe. So in this exercise, what I'm doing is I'm breathing normally, breathing in and breathing out. And I'm going to stop breathing after I finish a normal exhale. So I breathed out and I stop, and I'm just going to then wait and count how many seconds it takes me to breathe again. Now, for this, you probably need, you can estimate by just counting with your fingers, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. So you're all going to have to count your own number and see how far you get to. So I'm going to demonstrate. So I'm breathing in, breathing out, stop. Okay, so do your best and count for yourself, and then write your number down. This is number 10 on the sheet. Everybody? Okay, so you should now have check mark in each of those 10 lines, and if you add up the number of check marks in the first column, the middle column, and the third column, you'll get a number, and those 3 numbers should add up to 10, because we did 10 tests. Okay? And then in terms of figuring out what it means, if you turn your page over to the other side, if 5 or 6 or more of your check marks were in the very first column, then you are a chest breather or a very shallow breather. Okay? And you can put a check mark in that first column. Now I'm guessing that most of you are more likely going to be in the mixed breathing or in the shallow abdominal breathing groups. So the mixed breathing group means that the number that you have in your first column and the third column, both of them are somewhere between 3 and 6. Both those numbers between 3 and 6. And if that's the case, then you're probably more of a mixed breather. And finally, you might be an abdominal breather, and the way you'd know is if the number of check marks in the third column was at 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10. So the more check marks you have in the third column, the more you're using your abdomen on a regular basis. Okay? Your abdomen and your diaphragmatic muscle. And then you can actually distinguish between, if you're a shallow abdominal breather, that depending on how many breaths you took in a minute, if it's under 10, if you had 8 breaths or 6 breaths that you took in that minute, then you're definitely a deep abdominal breather. Okay? So has anybody have any problem or question in how to figure out whether you're a chest breather or an abdominal breather or a mixed breather? Yes, sir.
Depend on whether you've got damaged lungs?
Yes, good question. Would any of these results depend on whether you have damaged lungs? Absolutely. Another thing that could affect your results is if you had open heart surgery and they opened up your chest. That would affect your breathing, your normal, the operation of your ribs and your muscles. So any kinds of illnesses and things like that are going to give you more of a burden to overcome, to use those muscles well. Question?
What happens if my protein color 2 is only 2, but I'm understanding question 1?
What happens if your total in the last column was only 2, but your number of breaths that you took was at? It was at a 10 breaths in a minute. So it means that your lungs have a good capacity to breathe because you don't have to take a lot of breaths, but you're not living up to the potential of those lungs yet. So doing some exercises may well help. Yes?
There's some confusion here about, you refer to column 2, but then you talk about 3 columns.
Yes.
So could you clarify, please?
Yes, good point. So if you look at the very top of the sheet, column 1, one is titled column 1, and the third column over is titled column 2. So column 2, as it's titled at the top, those observations will indicate that you're using your diaphragmatic muscle more. If you've got a lot of check marks in column 1, that's more chest breathing. Okay? And again, the actual number does not matter so much as you've got a snapshot of where you are today at this point. These muscles can be trained and they can work better if you want to exercise them. That's the more important point in all of this. Yes? Does walking train your muscles and train you to be an abdominal breather? I don't think so, because I get people in my stress class, and we've now started to use this assessment, and I get people who are abdominal breathers, and I get lots of people who have been doing their exercise prescriptions religiously, doing the walking 5 times a week, and they've been doing it for months, but they're still chest breathers. So you can think of these as we get into certain bad habits, and you have to untrain those bad habits if you got into them. Okay? But they can be easily reversed. They're not things you're stuck with working on for 2 years. Yes?
If you had open heart surgery, how much damage is done that can't be repaired or replaced?
Good question. If you've had open heart surgery, how much damage has been done? Can it be repaired? I don't know. It would depend on, I guess, the surgeon and how much they had to open you up. Different procedures will call for different levels of cutting, and some of the newer procedures, they just make very, very small openings and do it all through cameras. So I don't have an answer, but what I'd say is that in all likelihood, it's just like cardiac rehab. Whatever damage has been done, it still pays to practice, to get better, to train the muscles to be better. One last question, and then we'll go to the demonstration.
I'd like to ask the people, they have chest breathing, people talk, it's any difference in the health? I mean, if I'm the chest, I might not have a heart attack, or I'm not. If I'm a colon, I might not have any disease in the body.
Okay.
Any difference in this?
So the question is, if you happen to do this and found that you were a chest breather, what implication does this have for your health? Does it mean you're more likely to have a heart attack or other problem? I don't know that I'd say that you're more likely to have a heart attack, but what I would say is you're not using your lungs in the optimum way that they were designed for you, not only for your heart, but for your digestion and for your nervous system balance, okay? For how calm and relaxed you can be. So if you are a chest breather, I would issue a kind of a challenge for you to try and do some abdominal breathing exercises for at least 4 to 6 months and see what happens. See how it can benefit you. Okay, so let's, I will. Yes, these poor guys. You're right, you're in my blind spot. But lucky for you, Alan, you've got the bright hair. Yes.
My normal breathing rate is between 32 and 40.
Okay.
And I time it on my watch.
Yes.
But I was also very conscious of the chart that you put up on the wall here.
Yes.
Where you had the numbers from 1 to 7.5 to 5. So the question that I have is, obviously the deep breathing exercises influence what the results would be. Your normal breathing may be 32 or 40 or more, but what is the target rate for your breathing exercises?
So while you're doing exercising, while you're doing your walking?
I just be sitting in a position like this, doing deep breathing exercises. What should be my target?
Okay.
5 a minute?
So if you're just sitting relaxed, you can actually get your breath count down. And yeah, if you can get it down to 5 breaths in a minute, at that level, Stephen Elliott says, your heart rate variability is the best it can be. So you're actually training the system to function in an optimum state. Now, as soon as you get up and start doing things and moving around, you won't be able to keep your breath rate at 5 per minute. And you may initially need to lie down to get it down to 5 per minute. In the CDs that I use for the stress program, I do have a track now where we start breathing at something like 15 breaths a minute, and then we kind of change it across 5 minutes, so you finish at 5 breaths a minute, just so you know kind of where you're at. Yeah.
So at that rate, would you say that what we're effectively doing is exercising our heart?
So what you're doing when you're breathing at 5 breaths a minute is that you're using your abdomen, your diaphragmatic muscle most effectively, and the abdomen to exhale to get the diaphragm up to the highest position, which is creating the most amount of vascular exchange, like blood flow into the system and out with the breath. So you're using your thoracic pump or the breath pump to augment your heart muscle to create the best heart rate variability profile possible. And to do that, you're using your vagus nerve, that is the parasympathetic nerve, and you're balancing the vagus and the sympathetic. Now, what that means, to have good vagal tone, means that your system is optimally responsive. Doesn't mean that when you finish your exercises that your breath count will go down to 5 a minute regularly. It won't. It'll probably rest around 12 to 14. That's pretty typical. But the system is toned up, so it can respond to ups and downs, and it's ready to handle anything that life throws your way. So that's the big advantage of doing the breathing exercises, is that you're kind of increasing your vagal tone. So let's actually practice the breathing now, because I'd want you to at least get a couple of hands-on chances to really see what we're doing. So the first thing that we're going to do is if you put your hand on your belly. And those of you who tested out or who were either a chest breather or a mixed breather, you should also put the other hand on the chest. And what you're doing is you're trying to breathe now, not moving your upper hand. You're trying to keep that hand as still as possible. Try and keep it frozen. And you're just trying to move your belly out when you breathe in. So I'll demonstrate. I'm going to breathe in. And now I'm going to exhale. Now when I exhale, I'm going to make a small opening in my lips, purse my lips. It's like blowing air through a straw, through a narrow opening, which means it's going to slow down. So I'm going to breathe in, belly goes out, and now I make a small opening. And you can notice the hand going down down, down, okay? And then you breathe in. So you're trying to get this lower hand to move out on the in-breath, and then you're on the in-breath. On the out-breath, small hole, and that's going to slow down your out-breath. It's going to make it longer. We want to make it very, very gradual and long. Yeah. Okay? So just practice that for a minute. On the in-breath, get the hand to move out as far as you can, and then exhaling through a small opening, nice and gradual, no rush at all. And then when you're ready, deep breath in and really focus on getting that lower hand to move out as far as you can. And then slow exhale through pursed lips. Okay, let's pause there. Are people getting that? Can you feel the difference? Can you feel your abdomen moving? So the more that abdomen hand moves, the more your diaphragm is active. That's the only way that hand's going to move, is if the diaphragm is working. So that's why you want to keep your hand there when you're practicing, at least for the first week, probably for a little longer. Okay? Any questions on what you're doing with this exercise? Pretty straightforward? Yes?
So actually, when I inhale, it's going in, but now I'm going to try to make it out.
Yes, make it go out. That's right. It was going in because you're a chest breather, so your stomach is trying to help your chest do all the breathing. You don't want that. So keep that still. Get that hand to move out. And in the first week, just do 3 to 5 breaths. Just 5 times. Just try to get the hand to move out. That's it. And then do it later in the day again. Okay? Now, those of you who are not chest breathers, if you're more of a mixed breather or abdominal, you can do this exercise for up to 5 minutes. But don't overdo it. So if you find if you're doing it properly, it's hard. Okay? It's strenuous. You're going to feel it in your abdomen. Okay? So just do 2 minutes. Do as much as you feel comfortable doing, and then stop. And then come back and do it later in the day. So what we tell the patients in our groups is you can do it up to 3 times a day and up to 5 minutes each time. But don't pressure yourself to do more than you're comfortable with. So the question is, if you've been a chest breather, maybe for years, is it hard to adjust? Does it take a long time? No, it really shouldn't. As long as you focus on the technique and doing it properly, but just for maybe a minute or so at a time until it gets to be more second nature. Then you can spend more time because the muscles are doing the right things. So I'm going to show you one last thing, and then we'll have one last question from this lady over here. So the last thing I want to show before Rob gets his hook out, and I'm a goner, okay, is I want to show you about breathing rhythmically. So if you're going to use some of these techniques, what I'd like you to focus on is the technique. So really getting the in-breath to get the belly to move out, and then on the out-breath, pursed lips. And your out-breath should be about twice as long as your in-breath. So you can count your in-breath. So as I'm breathing in, and then I breathe, and then I'm counting as I breathe out. So I actually breathe in about 3 and out in about 7. But as you continue with the breathing, let's say you do in-breath 2, out-breath 4, in-breath 2, out-breath 4. As you are into your second minute, you'll find, oh, I can do a little longer. So you do an in-breath for 3 and an out-breath for 6. So just try and keep the out-breath longer, twice as long as the in-breath, and that helps the system, the whole nervous system, kind of balance out. So one last question to this lady. Is this what we do when you can't get back to sleep at night? Yes, pretty much. But I'd urge you to practice the breathing during the day for a couple of weeks, because when you wake up in the middle of the night, you don't want to be lying there saying, now what did he say and what was I going to do? Right? You want to know and just do it automatically, and that'll slow you down and get you back to sleep. Okay? Thank you very much. You're a great audience.